What I was suggesting for my too small to succeed is that it really is a Swiftian proposal. We get rid of the hunger problem by eating children.
Well, I can tell you that in my opinion, the attraction of size to industrial organization and commercial organization has as much to do with the nature of pay scales as it does to do with the economics of production.
I think Mike's suggestion is a good one. My only question is how broadly it would apply, and I think it wouldn't apply that broadly. And I think Congress, I don't like much in the new bill that's proposed, but I think Congress got this, well, I don't want to say got anything right because it's really a train wreck of a bill, but it had the right idea about which firms are too big to fail. As Mike points out, almost no firm is too big to go through bankruptcy. So when I was writing in the 90s about chameleon equity or automatic conversions, I was talking about I wasn't ambitious enough. I was talking about a small problem, and that is the cost of bankruptcy for industrial firms. I wasn't thinking of contagion effects or large costs. Just bankruptcy has some expense. There's strategic behavior inside of it. At the time, there was a risk of getting continuing firms that should instead liquidate. So I was talking about a small savings that you could have within bankruptcy by avoiding bankruptcy altogether and using this automatic conversion under current jargon, the living will and planning in advance for financial distress. What the recent crisis has showed us is that it's not just savings of a few percent in the assets of a firm that might be rescued by something automatic like this. It's the entire financial markets, because there was a fear that if AIG had failed, AIG is the leading example. If AIG had failed, it could have caused a worldwide depression. And now Mike says don't let AIG get in the position that it was in. It was in that position, by the way, not only because of its size, but because of the speculative bubble that was allowed to form, where everyone treated an AIG guaranteed as if it was, an actual guarantee, not realizing that the emperor had no clothes, there was no money to pay it all. That unless real estate prices continued to grow exponentially forever, this whole thing was going to collapse, and that's what ended up happening. So if you put aside the AIGs, which is a very limited case, I think we can go ahead and let most firms grow, and it really is the financial firms that this should be applied to. I don't know that an airline can ever get so big that we won't let it fail. And in that case, although I think there'd be some savings to some automatic conversion, and that's what I've written about for 20 years, I don't think the government needs to get involved necessarily. But with these financial firms, I think Mike's suggestion is a good one. And one last point is, sometimes the government is not just trying to trying to deal with what it sees as a contagion. Governments use crises to pay off their political allies. And the example I always use when I talk about this from the Bush administration, the Obama administration. What did Bush do after September 11th? He bailed out airline shareholders. I mean, that's what the fund was designed to do. The fund that paid investment bankers all this money, and this just galls me. Some kid gets sent to Iraq and dies, and his family gets what, $2,000. An investment banker that was killed in the World Trade Center got all this money. I don't. That doesn't seem entirely equitable to me. If the government's going to be giving money to people, I'd rather have it go to the family of the kid and not the investment banker who tragically went to work and was killed. But I'm not sure it was any more tragic. Well, what was going on there? We didn't care about the investment bankers of the World Trade Center. We were bailing out the airline shareholders because there was a fear that there would be tort suits against the airlines and the shareholders would lose. This was, I think, a craven move by the Bush administration, and shouldn't. I thought it was outrageous. Equally outrageous, though, was Obama, paying off the UAW. That's all that happened in Chrysler and GM. The UAW were good to him, and he paid them off. This is just politics. So, in theory, if people are acting on principle, I think Mike's correct that, what we should do is take these cases, and again, I think there are a few cases having to do with financial markets, and not let them get too big to fail. But I don't know if that's going to solve the problem when politicians use the occasions of disasters to pay off their allies.
Okay, I think it's time to open to questions. Yeah, you want me to call on people, Eugene? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Specific question, more general part of it. There seems to be those discussions of higher risk when you're on the verge of bankruptcy. I wonder both how extensive that tendency is, and more generally, I'm wondering historically probably the cost of bankruptcy was too high.
There's actually evidence on whether firms take risks on the eve when they become financially distressed. There's a case in which, an entrepreneur, an equity holder, literally took all the assets, converted it to cash, went to Las Vegas and put it on a roulette wheel. That case is fun, but it's an urban legend. Firms don't, there's been studies on this, and maybe I haven't looked at it in years, but firms don't actually change their business practices to become riskier. They don't go from bread manufacturer to hula hoop manufacturing, for example, as they approach insolvency. That said, there is one very important risk that they continue to take, and that is continue at all as opposed to liquidate. So what ends up happening is you have firms that probably can maximize their value by liquidating that don't, that continue to stay in business until the last dollar spent in order to have a chance of a turnaround. I don't think bankruptcy has become too cheap. It's become harsher on managers, actually. So with co-authors, I have a paper talking about how bankruptcy has been delayed over the last 10 years as managers have been more harshly treated. They borrow more and go into debt in worse shape than they used to. So I don't think it's become too cheap, personally.
Yeah, and you can, I'm sorry if I don't know your name, so.
Grant Nelson.
Uh-huh.
I teach real estate finance, mortgage law. And 5-6 years ago, I had a student who had a PhD in economics going to law schools when I taught at UCLA. And he wrote a paper about the dangers of Fannie and Freddie. Now, a lot of people were suggesting the same thing at the time, that Fannie and Freddie be broken up into smaller, privatized into smaller entities. It wasn't done. He was predicting we'd have what we have today. And partly, Fannie and Freddie were hybrid in the sense that the world thought when they bought Fannie and Freddie debt that they were buying U.S. government debt. I mean, it's unlike any of the other companies, unlike AIG or Lehman or whatever. It's almost a fraud problem. There was an implicit guarantee of full faith and credit that didn't exist. But anytime members of Congress went to proposed, saying specifically there is no full faith and credit behind Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac debt, it failed. And so the market bet correctly. They thought Fannie and Freddie were too big to fail, and they were, and they got bailed out. So we destroyed the preferred shareholders and we destroyed the equity shareholders and bailed out debt. And
not only the pseudo-government guaranteed debt, we bailed out at 100 cents on the dollar the subordinated debt, that was the outrage.
Now that is,
right.
That's something I didn't know. I mean, that is even more outrageous. But it seems to me, ultimately, Fannie or Freddie should be broken up and privatized, truly privatized. I just wondered what your comments were.
Well, I mean, I just have a brief response that's sympathetic, which is that it was kind of ironic after all of the criticism of what went on with Fannie and Freddie that we then turn a large segment of the banking community into Fannie and Freddie, which obviously supports Mike's suggestion. And I mean, as much as my comments have been kind of provocatively negative on Mike's suggestion, if you really can't trust the government, then maybe it's the only alternative.
Well, I think you can't. And by the way, Barry, I regret to report to you that auto manufacturers, airlines in other countries exhibit the same phenomena as we see in financial firms. The British did British Leyland Motor Company.
The government's, oh, I see, yeah.
That government, they did a car company. Several, Alitalia, Swiss Air, I can give you several examples. The problem is the political salience of the firm, not its absolute size in terms of what you think mechanically could be managed in the process. And what I'm suggesting is a sort of prophylactic exactly against creating firms that will have political claims that when the swan arrives will be irresistible.
But without at least in this country, without the contagion risk, we've trusted the bankruptcy process to salvage these firms.
Well, we had just did 2 auto companies.
Well, because they didn't, yeah, that's right. So I agree with that.
So how, I mean, how do you prevent these, how does the political process prevent these politically favored firms from arriving?
Well, I'm assuming that you could somehow try to create the magic conditions that produced the tax reform of 1986. And that you could, if you spread this issue broadly enough and took advantage of the outrage that is clearly present in terms of the public, attempt to do in a way that didn't at the moment target a specific firm, attempt to provide a regime that you would tell taxpayers was designed to keep them from having to bail out firms. Look, is that a long shot? Yes.
Yeah.
But it's a shot.